Yeah. And I think all right.
It's amazing what the tools.
I call the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the February 2nd, 2026 study session of your Ashland City Council. This evening we have one agenda item, potential charter updates. Sabrina?
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. So as you know, and we'll experience tomorrow during the council meeting, staff has been going through and looking at both the charter and the ordinance for potential changes that we need to make. Before you tonight are two options for some administrative changes. So one is speaking to updating the language to align our ordinance noticing requirements with Oregon state law. And one is to clarify residency for elected officials. And so in your packet, you have kind of an explanation as well as some sample language for the ballot measures. And council is really looking for staff direction tonight on whether or not you would like to pursue one or both or none for the May election. So we would need to determine whether or not we want to move forward sooner than later due to the timing. And I think as some background on number 2, which is clarifying residency for elected office, our charter is vague in terms of the time required for residency before applying to be a council member or running for office. And so looking at kind of local jurisdictions, they tend to be between 6 to 12 months residency requirement prior to going before the voters to be elected for council. And then also having some clarification that it's required that elected officials reside in the city, and they do that for the period that they are in office and must do so before seeking office. This is an LSC recommendation. So given that we have 4 seats up in November, the thought was to help clarify that prior to the next election. Let's see. And then our ordinance noticing requirements are a bit outdated. They are meant more for a paper-heavy type administration with 3 copies available to the public, posted, on the wall, and then in a newspaper, which obviously has money and resources and is more antiquated than what we do now with electronic postings. So I think that sums it up.
So do you want to, we should take them one at a time. And do you want to, let's go ahead and start with the first one in our packet, which would be the one that is related to noticing requirements for ordinances. So is there a staff presentation around any of this?
So it's really just what's in your packet. So with the noticing requirement, it would revise it to fit state statute. So we have in here to match the Oregon revised statute. A no vote would keep it the same, requiring 3 copies. Alyssa, did you want to speak to anything regarding this as a reporter?
I was distracted. The noticing requirements. Yeah. So currently we notice on the Ashland News website and in the Rogue Valley Times, which has limited distribution, but it is the only newspaper of local circulation that meets our current charter language. All I can tell you is a lot of jurisdictions are moving away from that due to the lack of availability of print newspapers.
Questions, Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. So kind of to dive in, I emailed Carmel a little bit earlier, so no surprise where I'm going with this here. So one of the first things that stands out to me as a huge red flag concern around the language around this is including the actual ORS 192.640. As we know, legislation can change and ORSs change, and in doing so, we would then, by having that specifically that language in the charter, we would then have to go to the people and have a vote to then change potentially just even a sequencing of the numbers. So I understand the intent, which is around not doing this general circulation of a newspaper, which is, antiquated and obviously problematic. But that would be something of a flashpoint that I'd like us to discuss first of why are we including the specific ORS reference? And is there, if we were to even decide to move forward with a charter change, could we remove that and still get the meat of what we're trying to get?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could do just a broader reference. That would be an easy solution. I think that's good feedback.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
quick follow-up?
Yeah.
Yeah, so follow-up around that too. The other concern I have is around home rule. By doing so, we're essentially elevating the legislature and their requirements, whatever their minimum requirements might be, above our own charter requirements. And there might be a time where we decide, as I think we should, given home rule, what our own requirements might be. We might decide we want to keep it as a newspaper general circulation for some reason, or we might decide some other requirement. So one of the concerns I have is that we're kind of giving up that authority of home rule that we currently have to make our own decisions of what those reporting requirements are. And so, yeah, I was just kind of curious if anybody else flagged that and thoughts on that in particular.
Mayor, did you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead, Carmel.
Yeah, and then, and just for everyone's, to help guide the conversation, home rule is really where, as you are all familiar as legislatures, when you wear that hat, is where when state and federal law is silent, the local governments can insert its own laws, as you have kind of found throughout a number of ways. And so, yeah, I think for the question of home rule is when does it really benefit the city? And so maybe questions and discussions on that would be a helpful spot for the council to dive into.
So just a follow-up behind Councilor Bloom's question, would it be, it seems that when you have state law, you can make yourself at the local level more restrictive, but not less, right? And so by ordinance, could this council determine, like say there was a change in state law and we said, you know what, that's just not adequate timing for our community. By ordinance, could the council decide that it needs to give the community more time?
Yeah.
Or does that have to be a charter charter change?
Oh, sorry. Well, I'll answer the first part and then let me know if I got it. But I mean, oftentimes most home rule is more restrictive than the federal. Usually it can't really go the other way around because then you get into preemption. And preemption is really when there's like, if you take a state or federal law and you compare it with your local law, and if it's, say there's some scenario where it's like line by line, where the local government's like, yeah, we're going to do what we want. We don't care about you feds. And just to state the obvious, like that's what preemption is. So usually when local governments have like afford like more notice or more, so that would be like, that's how I see it play out in this example, is that if the council wants, like I see our current charter as having more restrictions on Ashland than is required by state law. And that's fine, like that's a policy choice.
So I don't know that I made my question clear. So could we put something in this change that says that we will follow ORS or a local ordinance if the council decides that it's more, that we need a longer noticing time for our community? And identify that the pathway for that would be an ordinance to lengthen it out.
Yeah, sorry, I must have not understood your question. Then, yeah, you can refer it by ordinance too.
You can do that. Okay. Questions? I see Councilor Dale online has a question for us.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, Carmel, I'm in line with Councilor Bloom and also the mayor on this. The issue that I had is looking at a bunch of different charters of similar cities close in Oregon is almost all of them make no reference to any state requirements, given the fact that, except for one, which basically says, kind of to the mayor's point, that, if an ordinance is, any ordinance passed, which, could be superseded by any subsequent or current Oregon law. So I guess I'm not really a fan of being more restrictive in the charter. I don't even think we need to even mention Oregon in there, like most of the other municipalities don't, and then we handle it by ordinance if and when we need to. Would that be something, I mean, would you agree with that, or is that, I guess, what problem are we trying to solve by adding specific Oregon language, state of Oregon language in our charter, as opposed to just being silent on it, knowing, to the mayor's point, that it will be superseded if and when necessary, simply just by statute and ordinance?
I think the problem we're trying to solve is the expense of the way we do it now, as well as the fact that it doesn't really work now, right? So I think there's, you can revise it to just remove this requirement altogether from the charter, and that would solve that. Or you can leave it more vague. I think that's the question is, this is not something that's easily done and costs significant funds. Do we want to keep doing this? And maybe we do, maybe we don't. I think you can have an ordinance that outlines how you will, post ordinances. It's kind of a, and remove it from the charter. I think that would just be, removing the ordinance requirements from the charter would then be the ballot measure.
Councillor Hanson?
Asked and answered.
Okay. Councillor Duquesne?
Thank you, Mayor. Part of what was answered is, what are we trying to get to here? And I believe you answered that for me. What we're trying to get to here is saving money. I looked at the ordinance and it said we've spent $25,300 since 2021. And you divide that by 4 and it comes to $6,325 a year. And I don't see that it's necessary to have to take away or trim this down or change this at all. I believe in home rule. I think it's fine the way it is. And I don't know why we're getting into the weeds behind this. And we have to post it at 3 places: Ashland.news, the city recorder's office, and City Hall. So I don't know what is so troubling about this ordinance, and to me, this is just a moot point. It needs to stay the way it is. And we need to have as much circulation out there as possible.
Councillor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. I think we kind of all touch on this, and I think the root of this is about the newspaper, right? Having to notice it in the newspaper. And so I think that's a valid argument. I think the idea of just striking entirely and doing this through ordinance is clean. And it would be nice if we could all kind of get a sense there on that as a group. But then furthermore, it brings up the other question that's about sequencing and timing. And is there value, Councilor Duquesne kind of was getting down this route here of, is there value in us doing this now? So the way I see it is we're gonna spend the money, get something on the ballot, go to the voters, put in this effort to notify people, to educate people on what's going on. And I feel like in that sense, going into an election year when we have much bigger fish to fry and conversations around other potential charter changes that are of a much larger scale, that we're really kind of stepping over a dime to pick up a penny at this moment. And I think that it would make sense, given the very, very low cost, that maybe this is something that's postponed until we can have a broader charter conversation and modernization that packages all of this up really cleanly to give voters the chance to look at it then. So curious where folks' thoughts are on that.
So I think there's a couple of things happening here at the same time. One is that there has been a process, as Sabrina mentioned, of just cleaning up the charter in places where we see that we're obviously out of sync with either the state government or with how we want to practice the work of the local government, right? So there are some, we've done this, you've seen this on several ballots up to this point where we've changed the structure of the recorder's office, that kind of thing, where we were looking at specific elements. We should, at this study session, talk also about the larger charter review. It has been a discussion point. I know that coming into this year in the budget cycle, both the charter adjustments and also the strategic planning process were identified for this biennial budget earlier, but we determined that we couldn't get both of those done in this biennium. We needed to do the strategic plan first before diving into a deeper charter change. And so what these two options are elements that I understand staff has identified as there's a reason to bring them forward outside of that other process. But I think we should also have a discussion as a council this evening, after we talk about these two potential charter changes, around the desire to do that deeper dive process. And it's a significant piece of work when we do it. It'll involve the community. There's specific ways that you do this so that you get strong community feedback and buy-in. So it's not a small undertaking, but I think we should have that conversation tonight, just so that we and the community knows what's on the horizon in terms of larger charter questions. So I think, are there any other questions of staff at the moment? Okay, we have one person who has signed up to speak with us this evening on the charter update questions. I'd like to bring him forward before we have any more deliberation on this first amendment. And what we'll do is, after he speaks, we will talk. I'll go around and ask everyone kind of to give us their general thoughts about this first charter change proposal. So, Mr. Mozina, you have 3 minutes, and I believe you know how the system works. Yes? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Council. My name is Paul Mozina. I live in Ashland. You are discussing aligning the charter with the Oregon state statutes, but what good is that if the charter is not enforceable? The Ashland Charter has fundamental flaws and conflicts of interest embedded in it that make it highly unlikely that, if the council were to violate it, they would be held accountable. Last summer, I contacted Ashland Chief of Police Tyler Muir regarding the council's violation of the charter's requirement that any action taken by the council be preceded by a public motion and vote. The charter mandates that the chief is responsible for enforcing the charter, and that failure to do so is grounds for removal. He asked me to explain the nature of the violations. In response to my summary and citation of his duties under the charter, he had this to say: Paul, while I agree that the charter has those words, I don't believe that they are meant to make me responsible for investigating procedural deficiencies, if they do in fact exist. The city attorney is the parliamentarian for council operations, so he, not me, would be in charge of addressing this. Shortly after that, he followed up: Paul, just to close the loop on this, I have learned that the CA has already addressed your concerns, so I will not be looking into this any further. Have a good day. While ostensibly being responsible for enforcing the charter, the chief relied on the opinion of the parliamentarian, Johan Paitella's, justification of the council's actions to ignore my complaint. The chief didn't explain exactly how the CA had addressed my concerns that the council's procedural deficiencies were in fact violations of the Ashland Charter. The May 19th study session and the June 3rd business meeting occurred shortly after Paitella had been appointed city attorney. He was newly responsible for ensuring that the council followed parliamentary rules, including the Ashland Charter. According to Chief O'Meara, this made him the perfect person to judge whether or not the council had violated the explicit requirements of the charter when they failed to vote on the amendments they made to the 2025-2027 biennial budget. The principle that, quote, no one shall be judged in his own case, quote, originated in ancient Roman law and is a cornerstone of any adjudicative procedure. But the obvious conflict of interest in this case was no impediment to Chief O'Meara relying on the city attorney. The charter also stipulates regarding the chief that, quote, a failure or neglect to faithfully perform any of such duties shall be cause for removal from office by the city council, quote. Does anyone think the council would remove the chief for failing to hold them accountable for disobeying the charter? The inherent structural flaws in the Ashland Charter make it highly unlikely that it will be enforced when the perpetrators of the violations are the mayor and council. When those responsible for investigating the violations serve at the pleasure of the violators, nothing will be done. When the city attorney is allowed to be the judge in his own cause and the chief of police is too lazy to investigate the matter, the Ashland Charter is unenforceable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Back to the deliberations. We have let's go ahead and go around, and we'll do with this first round. We will get feedback from individual councilors just regarding, are you interested in a charter amendment? And there's other questions. If the answer to that is yes, then there are some other questions about what the structure of that should look like. But let's go ahead and go around, and just please indicate if you're interested in a charter amendment, and this is specifically for the noticing requirements for ordinances. Okay? Anyone, whoever would like to go first?
Thank you, Mayor. You looked at
Go
me,
ahead.
so we'll start on this end, I guess. I commend the city for going through and pulling out some of these old, maybe obsolete pieces of language to save us time and money. So I am in support of always trying to update our draft. What I'm not in support of is maybe feeling a little bit of pressure to decide and put this to our direction within 3 weeks to go to a spring election. I just don't know with everything that's going on in the city right now if this is great timing to push this through, but I am in support of cleaning this up, and I appreciate the work for this first section.
Okay. Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, I think at this time, it's not the time to move forward. I think that we need to have that larger conversation and deal with a lot of these little things with a proper modernization effort, which is, as the mayor pointed out, a much bigger project.
Councilor Kaplan?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm happy to take on multiple activities at the same time. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. But I don't see this as a critical, necessary thing to change at this point. I'm happy, like Councilor Duquesne. I'm happy with the way it's working. I don't think it's a massive expense that needs to focus attention on it. I agree that there were some other changes that we made, that we suggested to put before the voters to change the charter, but those were much bigger. Those were changes of structure. That was not just changes of, trying to avoid posting a, notice in a printed paper rather than a virtual paper. I don't know. It just seems to me, not worth the effort at this point. I could consider this sort of thing in a bigger package, but not by itself.
Councilor Duquesne?
Thank you. I am not in support of this charter change. Like I said before, it would cost $6,325 per year to continue on the path that we're on. And if we're going to look at saving money, I can think of a lot of other ways to save money than to take this and remove what we're already doing. I believe we need to have as many notices as we can to keep people informed about how their local government is being ran. So I'm in favor of keeping it the way it is.
Yes. Councilor Hanson?
I support both of these changes. I mean, we are getting more efficient and we are refining our charter. I did think, as I do now, when I first read this would be sweetly bundled in a larger package. So I do support waiting for more charter changes, and I know that we run the risk of not having a rubber stamp. It might get confusing. There might be different, ways to play this out. Seeing as how many of these seats will be occupied by different people next year, we could tackle this now or we could tackle it later. But I understand the reasoning. They're both sticking points that we have encountered this last 3 years I've been here, and so I support ironing them out for sure. And I think that staff is right on. But I also agree that keeping it as broad and as close to home rule as possible as well. So I could go for this now, or I could go for it in a bundled package later.
And is Councilor Dale still on the call?
Yes, Mayor, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I am not in support of this change. I'll say more as to why as we get into the second one. I'll expand on that. But for the sake of expedience here and for what I've already said as to what I I guess, disagree with. I am not in support of this change.
Okay. So at this point, it looks like the general feedback from the council is that this isn't the right time for this conversation. What I heard, and we haven't gone in depth in terms of the actual changes that we're making. So I think we shouldn't understand this to say that the council is not supportive of looking at this in the future. That the council is not putting it forward now is not an indication that it's not interested in looking at this in the future in a larger bundled package. But that is what I've heard, is that this should be part of a larger structured, comprehensive change to the charter. Is that a correct assumption or correct feedback? Councillor Duquesne.
Honestly, one thing I'd like to comment on is that I do like the idea that this is separated out, because sometimes when it's a larger bundle, it can get diluted and get lost in translation. So I appreciate that it is separated out, and when it does come back, and I don't think I'll be supporting it then either, but I do want to say that I appreciate it being separated out.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead then and move on to the second proposal.
This one would just clarify residency requirements for elected officers. So requiring that, and this is up for council to decide, that there's a period of time prior to the election that someone must be a resident of the city and a registered voter, and that residency is verified by Jackson County, and that they must remain a resident of Ashland for the duration of their term in office. So we have had questions about this that have come up before. In my time here, charter is pretty vague. All it says, you shall be a resident and a qualified voter. There's no time frame given. So technically that person can move here the day before the filing deadline and file to be a counselor. Maybe that's fine, and that's fine, but this is just an area that we've seen other jurisdictions clarify for their election purposes, and so we wanted to bring this to your attention.
Questions? Councillor Dale?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So this question would be for Sabrina or whomever. So I've again looked at various charters locally, regionally. There's some that say 12 months residency, and 6. Some that make no mention, like ours. A lot of them do. My question is what was the reasoning that staff selected 12 months? Or if it, and I may be incorrect, this may have been at the direction of council, but is my understanding this is staff? And why was 12 months selected?
That was just selected as a starting point. For example, Central Point and Phoenix have 12 months, but Medford has 6 months. So I think it was just a year of residency prior to representing the populace seemed reasonable place to start. And then, of course, that's a policy decision by council if they're putting forward the resolution for the ballot item to determine
Thank you.
what you think.
Councillor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. Kind of a follow-up on that. I'm also trying to understand what the reasoning is for this. The question is why? I mean, we haven't had an issue before. It works. We have a process, right? So whether it's an appointment and yes, they're a resident or they're not a resident, and then council deliberates and decides if that person's qualified or not. Alternatively, in an election, somebody files to run, they're a resident, they're not a resident, and the voters decide. And so for me, it's the question really, the framing should be, is it incumbent on us as a council and to convince the voters to decide to essentially game the system and decide what qualifies as a qualified person with some minimal standards, or should we really leave that up to the voters? I mean, for me, I look at a situation where somebody might move here a month before the filing deadline, and they file and they go out in the community, and the community says, hey, you know what, this person's a rock star and would be a great addition to our community. Let's vote for that person. And if we set it up in this way where it's 12 months, we lose an opportunity to have somebody really special that could serve this community and help participate with us and be a good partner with us in helping being stewards of this community. So I would frame it that way for us, and I would really push back on having any additional requirements, because really ultimately the voters, the community, us, are the ones who should decide who represents us, not the
Counselor,
charter.
did you have a question?
It was embedded.
Okay. So one of the things that we should think about is that there are multiple elements here. We already have a section of the charter that does create requirements, and it says, all elective officers except the municipal judge shall be residents and qualified voters in the city. But it doesn't tell us what it means to be a resident and what it means for the city recorder to certify that that person is a resident. So without any of that guidance, there really isn't a residency requirement. Because if we're asked to figure out what that looks like, a qualified voter in the city, you would go to the county to check on that. But we don't know anything about the timing of what that looks like. And there's also the element in this space around that you have to stay as a resident in your city for the time of your service. And I know from the past that we've had a number of counselors, when they've moved out of the city, they've resigned under the understanding that you had to be a resident. But are we to, as we look at this charter element, understand that there actually isn't a requirement to live in the city once you are elected?
I think it's pretty silent on that.
It's silent on that. So in our charter right now, we are saying you have to be a resident in order to be elected, but you do not have to be a resident in order to serve. Councilor Sherrill.
Thank you, Mayor. Could we maybe clarify how Jackson County defines residency and what we would hang, what kind of paper we would have to hang on an applicant or somebody in a sitting position? Because I don't think that they're in the business of enforcing where people live, but maybe I'm wrong. So if we're using them as the standard, how do they define it?
I wouldn't say anyone's enforcing it. So they definitely do the voter registration, and I believe they're the formal record keeper of the mailing address of residents. And so that's why we would verify the mailing address of the potential elected official.
Just kind of a follow-up question, if I may, Mayor. I know this came up with me, and there was some discrepancy in what the residency requirement was, and I found out that there's residency for where you live, there's residency based on how you pay tax, there's residency based on your mortgage, there's residency based on where you're registered to vote. And I think that's what's key, and I think we're going down a slippery slope if we start looking at residencies and how many days qualify annually as a residency, and that there's natural selection built in to our process. If somebody's not here and present, that would probably be reflected in a vote or an appointment. Thanks.
Yeah, and just as a follow-up to that, it is possible to have all of the other elements of this without any sort of a time frame of residency. So by the filing date, a person would have to be registered with Jackson County as a voter in Ashland, right? So some of these elements could be pulled apart, and the 12 months doesn't even have to be in there. We don't have to have any kind of a timing for residency.
Yeah, I would agree, Mayor, but residency and where you're registered to vote have different definitions.
Mm-hmm. Councilor Duquesne.
My back to residency, because to me it's self-explanatory. And if it says a resident and a registered voter, so it's a registered voter in the city of Ashland. I don't think we need to get down the rabbit hole with this. And my question, is this even democratic? Can we do that? Can we say that you have to live here for X amount of months?
Yes.
Oh, I think you did refer and say that others have done that. I don't think this is necessary. I believe that the citizens of Ashland I have good faith that they have good sense, and so I don't see that this is necessary. And being a registered voter in Jackson County can show where you live and where you're registered to vote. So I think that's kind of a one and done kind of a situation.
Councilor Hanson.
Thank Thank you. I think the one thing I really like about this clarification is that it spells out resident of Ashland, because like the discussion is going in these different places, we have people within the county that live in Ashland. They're on county property, but it's within the, the boundaries of Ashland. And so, although you and I might not be confused by that, I'd hate for city recorder or another, battle, to kind of come out of this. If we can actually add language to say resident of Ashland, that would make me happier. So again, I think this is a great addition to add to the things that we're doing in the charter. I wish we could do this by council vote, because we can't, because it's a charter amendment. We have to do it by vote of the people. But these little housekeeping things they're important to us when we need them. So I don't want to lose sight of this, but I sure would like to see this like more efficiently streamlined for ballot measures. I'm not sure how we do that. That's my input. And I appreciate the consistent work on sharpening our efficiency and our charter to get it better. It's important.
Councillor Kaplan.
Yes, thanks. So I'm looking at the language in section 2, qualifications. All elective officers except the municipal judge shall be residents and qualified voters in the city. Other than the time frame, okay, if we take away the time frame, that seems exceedingly clear to me that in order to be an elected officer, which is a councilor or mayor, you have to be a resident and a qualified voter when you're elected, and as long as you hold an elective office. So I don't understand how this could not be read to include the requirement to stay a resident and qualified voter within the city once you're elected. So I'd like to get some legal clarification of that, Carmel. Seems pretty unambiguous to me.
Yeah, I actually tend to agree with Councillor.
Carmel, can you get closer to your microphone, please?
Yeah, and I'm happy if I may be missing some nuance in registration, or maybe, so happy for feedback from the recorder if there's some nuance that I'm missing. But I tend to agree with Councillor Kaplan that it seems that if someone's a resident and a qualified voter, so resident if they live in Ashland, so yeah, I'm trying to think of like what would be scenarios where there would be confusion. And so Councillor Hansen's point kind of got me thinking of like, could there be a difference if someone's like in county? But I think that all would be worked out if with Jackson County voter when you get your ballot.
You're not a voter.
Councillor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, to start, I'm with Councilor Kaplan on this. This seems pretty cut and dry in section 2. I'm also skipping down to section 4 under vacancies, which says an office may be deemed vacant, things, and then you get to, or ceasing to possess the qualifications for the office. So that answers the other side of the when. And so the part that's missing that I would defer to the city attorney's office is for clarification, probably by ordinance, of what you would do and what that consists of. But I think the charter in and of itself is pretty crystal clear. But I guess my question, excuse me, Mayor, would be probably for Alyssa, which would be, how have our city recorders been doing this for the past 100 years? Or at least the last 50 since 1970?
Great question. Historically, the city recorder has gone to the county and said, here's an address of a person who would like to run for office. Can you please verify that the address provided on their form matches the address on file for where they received their ballot?
And I think that this is actually one of the things that we're looking at is actually the filing date, right? What needs to be in place by the filing date versus an election date or an appointment date, right? Because our city recorder has to qualify that, and I don't see that necessarily in here, but that would be maybe something to think about in all of this. Councilor Bloom.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to touch on something or elevate something that Councilor Hanson brought up, talking about, there's people with Ashland addresses that are not in the city of Ashland. And it occurs to me, double checking this here, it says, shall be residents and qualified voters in the city is crossed out to be replaced by a resident who's lived in Ashland. There's no reference to city. So now we've gone from something that is very clearly defined as the city of Ashland to something that is now defined as broad city or broad Ashland, which could include outside the city. So that aside, I mean, if we were to move forward with this, I would say that I don't think that this is quite in terms of the syntax in here, that it's ready to go. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that there's a gap there that would need to be addressed.
So what I've heard around the different councilors, certainly I haven't heard from everyone on this, but there seems to be, if it goes forward, there seems to be a lack of interest in the residency time requirements. Is that correct? That if this council goes forward, the council would not be interested in setting a specific amount of time that a person has to be a resident for? Okay, so I think what we can do is we can set that aside and say we are no longer talking about a 12-month question, and we're just talking about the process and structure. It seems that there are quite a few questions this evening. What is the time frame when we think about, just as a reminder, what is the time frame for putting this forward for the May ballot? Because we are right up against it, right?
Yeah, we'd need a resolution by next council meeting to have it on the ballot. I think council has a few choices. They can choose to bundle this or drop it or push it forward. I think for staff, I mean, as Councilor Sherrill pointed out, he was part of what brought this forward, that, we want to be clear on how we are operating to ensure that everyone who is signing up to represent Ashland represents Ashland, and there is only one Ashland. There's not Jackson County, there's Ashland, right? Whether it's city of or Ashland, it's just Ashland. And so I think, we just want to make sure we're doing proper due diligence on our side, because we have had complaints for both things. I think in terms of a time frame, there is just the LOC's recommendation, and that is a policy decision. But I think we can also just continue to function under the current language. And then, if these discrepancies come up, navigate that.
Councilor Duquesne, did you have something?
I thought you were ready to go around.
No, not quite. So one of the confusion pieces I think I see in here is where it says all elected officers except the municipal judge shall be residents, right? It doesn't say when we determine that they are residents. And so somebody could say, I'll get there by the time of by the time that we have the election, I will make sure I'm a resident. And I don't know what our recorder does with that, right? Because until they're an elected person, that this does not apply to them. And I think that's part of what needs to get cleaned up in here, is maybe a reference to the filing date, right? That by the filing date or the appointment, I see you, thank you, Counselor. By the filing date or the appointment date, that the person, if they need to square up some paperwork with the county, that they have until the specific time to do that. Because I don't know how our recorder says, no, you can't go forward for election, or you can't go forward for appointment with this if somebody says, well, I just have to hit it before the decision is made, right? And the second piece of this is the lack of requirement to remain a resident of the city while you are serving. Now, the council, I don't know what that turns into in terms of could a council remove someone because they've moved, but if there isn't anything in a charter, I don't think they can. So this becomes, to me, there are actually some structural questions that I would prefer this council addresses and puts in front of the community before we go into the longer revision process and before we go into this next set of elections. Are there any other questions for council or for staff? Councilor Bloom?
No questions.
Councilor Duquesne?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is I believe you said that somebody who wants to run, how do we decide if this individual is a resident? Well, that onus is on that person who wants to run because they fill out the paperwork, they give it to the recorder gives it to Jackson County, and if they are not a resident of Ashland, or a registered voter here in the city of Ashland, and a resident, then they cannot run. Once it's given to Jackson County verifies that. So the onus, it seems, is on that person who wants to run, whether they have their act together or whatever by the date. That's not on the recorder or on anyone. The onus is on them, right?
I don't believe so. I believe it's on the recorder to confirm. And if
The recorder confirms everybody, but if I am running in the city of Medford and I don't live there, that onus is on me. And the recorder's going to do their job whether they live here or not. I mean, I don't want to get in the weeds with this. I understand that I believe it's important that if somebody runs, they're elected, they have a 4-year term, yes, they need to live here their 4 years. I agree with you on that. However, if somebody is running, then that onus is on them to fill out their paperwork correctly, and the deadline is on them, and they give it to the city recorder. And if they are not honest, or if they're not honest, then it will come back to the recorder and they can't run.
Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, my question is for you, Mayor. I'm just trying to understand what the urgency is for this. I mean, unless there's somebody that's going to be running in this upcoming election, we haven't had a situation where somebody ran, got elected, and lied and never became a resident. I mean, ultimately, yes, we should look at the mechanics of this broadly, but what's the rush to do this before, in the spring? It doesn't seem to make any sense.
There has been an issue, and the issue that came up became an issue of what is the interpretation of this ordinance. And when you have, what we do not want to have is an interpretation happening when we have a particular person in front of the recorder. Because no matter which way it goes, it is going to feel like it is subjective. And that's what I think we're trying to solve for here. If the way that it is written now, I understand that somebody who does not live in Ashland, could register, could apply to, could file to run. And typically what would happen is the recorder would say, you don't live here, you can't run. But that's not actually what this says. This says you simply cannot be an elected officer. So the question of, we talk about it as, well, somebody would be moving in, but it's more of a question of how does the recorder, in a completely transparent and fair way, assess that somebody has met the requirements to run for office? Because that's where the recorder is involved in this, is certifying to the county that this person has met our charter requirements to actually run for office. All of our requirements here talk about serving in office, but they don't give her guidance for what she should do if somebody maybe lives here but they didn't register here, or they live here and they weren't registered to vote when the deadline hit. The way that this reads here is that they could run for office, they just can't serve until they meet the residency requirements.
Isn't that what campaigns and elections are for, though, to suss that out?
Well, you have to. There's actually a process. This actually shouldn't be anything about the running for office piece of this. There should be a clear delineation of what makes somebody eligible to run, and it should not be open to interpretation. And right now, this is so vague that certain circumstances force an interpretation nearing a deadline, and that is a problem. Councilor Dale, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm actually just looking at, and there'll be a question at the end of this again for Alyssa, but I'm looking at the Oregon well, it's actually, you get it from the county and the state, but DSCL 101 form that all of us had to fill out when we filed. And down at the bottom, it says candidate attestation. By signing this document, I hereby state that, and a couple other things, but it says I will qualify for said office if elected. And it points to ORS 249.031, section F there, which 1F, which basically says that they have to, each candidate shall declare, other things, a statement that the candidate will qualify if elected. So I think it's pretty clear that while a municipality runs a risk of, upon election, re-verifying by the city recorder, but I think that, I guess I would ask Alyssa as a city recorder, are those statements that you find that there in ORS 249.031 and what's on your SEL 101, when you certify these, you're certifying these as the recorder, as a city official to do this, that they meet all of the other requirements and the signatures and so forth, and you validate all that. But we're going by that attestation statement, both in the SEL 101 as a function of the state statute. Is that correct?
Without the language in front of me, I think that's correct.
I guess we would say is what we're ultimately trying. My question is we're ultimately trying to solve for two problems here, potentially. Number one, as I understand it, is I think it's clear that it doesn't matter, at least by state law, that they just have to be, and by our charter, by the way, is what Councilor Kaplan put out, that on the second that you are elected, at 8 p.m. local when the results come out or whatever it is, or actually I believe it's when you're sworn in, but we can deal with that later, that you have to be a resident and qualified voter. So the question is are we solving for a problem with a municipality and its voters and residents get all the way to this point only to find out that that person can't qualify? That's during an election. I know when council appoints that the time frame is a little bit shorter, but it's still, I think those statutes still apply. And then again, do you have I would think that the vagueness is what we do when someone is elected and qualified, and now they no longer are a qualified voter. How you go about how would you go about dealing with that? Is that something that legal would have by ordinance or interpretation that council would have to take up, and how would that are they just deemed vacant? But I guess if you don't have the language in front of you, then I won't put you on the spot, so I won't ask you that question. But
I'm ready to chime in a little bit.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess if kind of a few points of feedback. One, if there's ever an ambiguity, especially if there's a clear policy direction, it's always better to speak with specificity to whatever that is. So like the fact that we're even having an argument suggests that there is enough ambiguity. Usually, you don't want to be in a position where you have to make an argument. So that can be one approach in thinking about this ordinance change. And then also, I mean, I think for when there would be an issue, I think that the one way I'm sort of thinking about it is that I don't really see it being a legal issue until someone actually is elected. And that's kind of getting to the point that the mayor's bringing up of like, well, so someone can like run, we can go through all this administration, and then the pieces kind of don't fall together. And then that means we need to go back to square one. So I think that there could be some value, certainly, in having a home rule for when someone wants to run, that they are.
Mm-hmm. Sabrina?
So apparently these ballot items are like two polar opposites, because the first one, we want home rule, we want to be more restrictive. And this one, we're content potentially to stay with the ambiguity of like the state requirement. So I think really staff's intention in bringing this forward is to bring attention to the fact that this ambiguity has caused issues, and we are frequently having multiple seats up for election, more so than even our standard number. over the last couple of years. And so is it the will of council to put some better defined parameters for those who are looking to run to better understand whether or not they qualify to run, and to help with the internal process to ensure that we've done our due diligence properly to ensure that those running to represent the community have appropriately indicated that they are meeting the charter requirement to do so.
So, Councillor Dale, thank you for reminding us of what is on the filing document, which is a state form. And so it seems to me that in terms of actual elections, there really isn't any certification that happens at the recorder office. They attest that they will meet the requirements, and we put them on the ballot. So I think the question really is around appointments, and we don't have that same statement, I don't recall, in the application to serve an appointed position, elected official position, right? So if we have a vacancy here and we put out a set of applications, I don't think that we have taken that same language across from the SEL document. And maybe if we did, then that would align both of those processes in terms of by the time you get sworn in, you have to be able to meet these requirements. And then it's consistent for both elections and for appointments. Is that a potential fix for because we don't want the ambiguity. We want it to be very clear so that somebody isn't feeling like they're being eliminated from the possibility of running, subjectively.
Yeah, and I've reviewed the vacancy part in some other, the vacancy section in our charter in some other contexts, and I think that it would be a pretty convenient way to cross-reference. Like if someone is no longer a resident of Ashland, it would be easy to cross-reference that vacancy section. Obviously, I need to do a double look, but.
So the vacancy section is maybe where that other element sits. Yeah. Thoughts? Okay, so we can just go ahead and go around. Councillor Dale, Councillor Captain, did you have something?
I don't have anyone.
Okay. Councillor Dale.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up question. So, Mayor, yeah, that's my interpretation too. Well, not interpretation. That's how I guess I read it, and that's what we dealt with appointments. That we just went by the language in Article 3 of a charter. My question is to Carmel: is can we write an ordinance that clarifies? Don't touch the charter, let's just say. Can an ordinance be written to clarify requirements relative to appointments in a time frame, and also an ordinance that clarifies what a vacancy is, so that can be modified by ordinance at any time council so chooses? We can do that to clarify wording in the charter without modifying the charter. Is that true?
Yeah, one thing I'm thinking through with that question are like the cost benefits of where something is really useful to kind of have a little bit more set in stone. And when it comes to an elected official, I guess the short answer is yes, we can do that. And I'm thinking probably makes sense. There's some room to do that. What I would want to make sure is just that the terms are clear. Yeah, I think we could. Sorry, I'm just talking out loud a little bit.
No, it's fine. I mean, if
Yeah.
you get it wrong, you got to go back to the voters. I mean, if we get it wrong in an ordinance, we have that discussion and we fix it.
Councillor Kaplan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go back to the question that I was going to ask and decided not to. But my question really is along the same lines, is when there is something that is ambiguous, like this, and particularly how it's applied to an appointment versus to an election, what is the process inside the city recorder's office in actually interpreting, or the city attorney's office, to interpret what our charter means? I mean, it seems like there would already be a process. Is there some, I don't know, drafting language that exists to be able to shed light on what was meant by the charter, or what sort of guidelines do you use in order to decide
Yeah.
it means one thing rather than another?
Yeah, so your question is really kind of a question of statutory interpretation. Usually the first tenet of statutory interpretation is you look at the plain language of the
yeah.
statute. If that's ambiguous, you can look at legislative intent. So in theory, we could go back to whatever 19 or 18 or whatever and look at the minutes. And then, sorry, before legislative intent, you also look at other parts. You look at the statute as it's put within the broader context. And the absence of anything concrete, I think it can then it could turn to a reasonableness factor.
So in this case, when it did come before the city recorder to decide whether a prospective appointee was eligible, what was the process that was followed? Was the city attorney involved? Or did you go through this process and decide that, in fact, he was, or what happened?
The process involved the council chair and the mayor chiming in with the recorder, stating that as long as those qualifications were found by the appointment date, then they felt that that was the interpretation of the charter. Doug kind of agreed with that. Johan said that there was not qualification based on that, so the legal department said that was not qualification. But we caved to political pressure to move it forward.
Okay, so given that, I understand thanks for that clarification on how, because it's not just going to come up here. There's all kinds of ways in which the charter, any charter, it doesn't matter how clearly it's written, as we know with our Constitution, it's subject to interpretation, as long as we have a process for that. I like the approach suggested by Councillor Dale of just let's have this is how we understand it, and let's approve that, and that's how you can apply it. And that can be a resolution or an ordinance. I don't know that it really matters. They're both the same force of law. So I'd be in favor of clarifying this with a resolution or an ordinance, and then moving on rather than trying to change the charter, which seems to me not all that unambiguous. Not all that ambiguous. It seems mostly pretty clear, except for this one aspect.
So let's go ahead and go around and just, what is each individual counselor thinking about this issue and how, whether it needs to be resolved, and if so, what pathway you would like to take. Who would like to go first? Counselor Bloom.
Yeah, I think an ordinance is a cleaner way to go about this. I do think that we're kind of chasing a boogeyman here, and ultimately it's up to the elected representatives of the city of Ashland and the people of Ashland to decide if somebody is qualified or should serve or not within the framework that's already provided in the charter. I would also add that this is maybe, if we want to have this conversation in the larger context of charter updates, that's fine. But when we look at things in the charter that actually have serious negative impacts on this community, this is not one of them right now. There's others.
Councillor Duquesne?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with my colleagues that have spoken thus far. I don't want to get into the weeds behind this. The charter is as it is, and it's clear. And I think that we don't need to touch this as a part of the charter. I am in favor of an ordinance. And having the ordinance written to adhere to what was already discussed, I think that that's simple. When we do get into the charter, this is not on the top of my list. There's much bigger things to look into. So I'm in favor of coming back with an ordinance, a resolution, and let's look at that and let's adopt that.
Councillor Hanson?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I mean, I still think it's good housekeeping to clean this up, and if we can do it in ordinance, I think that that's a preferred method. Otherwise, I believe it's important to clean it up, and we should try to bundle it with some more fixes that I believe are almost rubber stamp. And I would hate to, as Councilor DeCane spoke about in the last proposed change, there might be some people who really don't favor that change for notification and would not favor this one as well, because if they're all together, it's either thumbs up or thumbs down. So I see the problems with that, but it doesn't seem like it's a burning issue for us. But it's also something, like I said, it's efficiency, and it's a problem that's came up before. We need to deal with it. So I appreciate that.
Councillor Kaplan.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I don't favor submitting this to the voters for a charter change. I appreciate the search for removing ambiguity and for guidance and how to do that. I think it sounds like it wasn't optimal last time, but I think we should fix that with some clear language that shows how it's going to be applied, either through a resolution or an ordinance. I think it also does need to be reflected in the form, the application for appointment, because it sounds like that's maybe where we could remove ambiguity. If it's not the same as the elective. Thanks.
Councillor Sherrill.
Thank you, Mayor. I do appreciate the intent to find a clear and objective standard. I mean, going through this personally and hearing a yes, no, maybe, I know there was maybe some discussions that prompted this. I thought that the qualification was crystal clear and that the right decision was made. I do see the question of continued residency maybe being addressed in an ordinance because there isn't really any standing there, or maybe not even any past practice on that. But I would just again caution, we need to be careful about how we define the difference between residency and where you're registered to vote. I spent a lot of time on the phone with Chris Walker, talking to the state, doing all my due diligence, and I was really surprised to hear there's a lot of different what ifs, but somebody could live in Ashland and also own property, and they would be registered voter in the area where their property has the highest value. If it's one continuous piece, there's a lot of different moving parts that I think it's a longer conversation than we think if we really dig into it. But I do, again, appreciate staff trying to find those clear and objective standards, so when we're up against a deadline, everybody's not trying to make a decision, at the emergency. So I do support putting this forward at a later date and possibly some kind of ordinance. But I would also add that seeing it right now and then being expected to give staff direction at the next meeting, in less than 3 weeks is a little bit fast, in my opinion. Thank you, Mayor.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Dale.
Yeah, thank you. The short part is, yeah, I'm fine with having an ordinance. I think that's where this discussion belongs. The longer version, just a little bit that I wanted to say before, but it's specifically on this one, is I'm actually very much opposed to this charter change. And not because of its content, but because I firmly believe the charter as our guiding document for this municipality is not to be taken lightly. Changes. It's not like changing, dog barking laws and the whole thing, the 18 or so that we have coming up tomorrow night. You do this with intention, you do this with purpose, and especially when you are talking about elections, and especially in this environment that we find our country in today, you do not mess with documents like the Constitution or a city charter without absolutely talking to citizens about this, without absolutely having this dialogue. And you know what? Medford may have 6 months and Talent and Phoenix may have 12, but for over 100 years, the citizens of Ashland didn't think this was a problem. If they do, we need to have a comprehensive discussion with that and get it out there. But I do not think that we rush at all to get this on a May ballot. To the point of earlier that was stated, I was the council chair sitting in the room when this was discussed. I can't speak to any kind of caving to political pressure. What I do know, speaking for myself, was that I was calling out the words as written in our charter. And so take that for what it's worth, but I wanted it to be applied uniformly and as written. And so I just, I clearly think that this is a much longer and more comprehensive discussion, and certainly good with the ordinance, but absolutely opposed to doing this at this time from a charter change. Thank you.
Thank you. For my part, I appreciate the staff is trying to help solve a problem that it was a real problem and was ambiguous and remains somewhat ambiguous. I like the idea of bringing that language across from this SEL form so that, again, that gives our recorder very clear direction. There is no analysis at the application point for appointments. If they sign the attestation, that's it, and they go before the council. And that, to me, is a big part of what we're trying to get to here, is a clarification so that our staff members are not stuck in a place where they are trying to interpret strange circumstances that may come in front of them. So we can either solve that by trying to chronicle all of the strange situations and giving direction, or we can solve it by saying the person has to attest, and by the date that they're sworn in, they have to meet those requirements. I do like the idea of an ordinance. I think there is some level of detail that we should put in front of this body to understand what do we mean by residency. To Councilor Sherrill's point, there's a lot more complexity than there was when this charter was developed, and I think we can get to that complexity through an ordinance. It also is not as easy to change as a resolution, but it is also not as set in stone as a charter. So I like that where that is, and I wouldn't. I think while I agree that it is important to address charter changes carefully and elections carefully, I don't want to in any way make it appear that there has been anything done here that wouldn't be the right path forward. What the staff has done is they have been issue spotting for us, which is what we have asked them to do, to look out ahead and tell us if you see something that is going to potentially be a problem, and then guide us through a process of potentially fixing it. And this process tonight, I think, worked exactly the way it is supposed to, in that we have issues that the staff has brought forward with us. They proposed a resolution to each of these issues. The council decided to take a different tack, but now we understand those issues, and I'm expecting this evening to give some direction in terms of an ordinance process so that we can sort into this. So I think that this actually is what it looks like when this process works correctly, and I appreciate that the staff is trying to look out ahead and make sure that we don't run into issues. We want to be clear, we always want to be fair, and we don't want to be in a circumstance where staff maybe has one read and elected leaders have a different read, and no one is quite sure who's got the authority in that space. There are some things to clean up here. So let me see if I captured what this council's desires are. Tell me if this sounds right. That the council would like to move forward with an ordinance to clarify the elements in the charter around residency, how that works, particularly with appointments, how we understand that, and also that it includes remaining a resident for the time of service on council. Does that sound correct? Does that sound right? Councilor Bloom.
Yeah, I would just add that since this is an ordinance that's going to concern elected officials, that maybe a good place for this is with the ordinance, the AMC working group, to go over and sort out what that language might look like. Since it affects elected officials should be involved in drafting that.
Councilor Duquesne?
And I'd like to also include the language from the SEL too, to be drawn over.
Yeah. So let's take up Councilor Bloom's question. Does it sound appropriate that for the AMC code working group to start to lay out what might be that group does not write ordinances, just so we're clear, but could discuss what are the pieces that should be included in an ordinance. Does that look right? Councilor Dale?
Yes, I was going to say the same, that I think there needs to be a good discussion before that just comes back to us in the form of an ordinance, but Councilor Bloom's suggestion is certainly appropriate.
Okay. And Councilor Sherrill, does that sound correct to you? Okay, so we would add that to the direction to staff, is that the Ashland Municipal Code Review Group would take up the initial discussion. And then the last element, to Councilor Duquesne's point, is the language in the SEL that means that they will affirm that they will meet the qualifications by the time that they are elected, that we would move that across into our appointment application process, so that the same rules apply whether someone is running for office or trying to be appointed to office. Does that sound correct? Seeing head nods. Yes. And Councilor Dale, how did that sound to you?
Yes, that sounds appropriate. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything missing from that direction? Did we get it? All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for a good discussion and good direction back to staff. There is, as always, more work to be done, but I think we made some good progress tonight in unearthing some issues that we need to address as we go down the road. All right. There are no other addition or agenda items, so meeting is adjourned.